Hello and welcome to my channel. Today is Monday and we are doing True Crime and Makeup Monday, and we are going to be covering for Halloween month the Villisca axe murders. The Villisca axe murders occurred between the evening of June 9th, 1912 and the early morning of June 10th, 1912 in the town of Villisca, Iowa, United States. The 6 members of the Moore family and 2 guests were found bludgeoned in the Moore residence. All 8 victims, including 6 children, had severe head wounds from an axe. A lengthy investigation yielded several suspects, one of whom was tried twice. The final trial ended in a hung jury, and the second ended in an acquittal. The crime remains unsolved. The Moore family consisted of parents Josiah B., aged 43, Sarah, 39, and their 4 children, Herman Montgomery, 11, Mary Catherine, 10, Arthur Boyd, 7, and Paul Vernon, 5. An affluent family, the Moores were well known and well liked in their community. On June 9th, 1912, Mary Catherine Moore invited Ina May and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, 12, to spend the night at the Moore residence. That evening, the visiting girls and the Moore family attended the Presbyterian Church, where they participated in the Children's Day program, which Sarah had coordinated. After the program ended at 9:30 p.m., the Moores and the Stillinger sisters walked to the Moores' house, arriving between 9:45 and 10 p.m. On 7 a.m. the next day, June 10th, Mary Peckham, the Moore's neighbor, became concerned after she noticed that the family had not come out to do their morning chores. Peckham knocked on the Moore's door, and when nobody answered, she tried to open the door and discovered that it was locked. Peckham let the Moore's chickens out, and called Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. Like Peckham, Moore received no response when he knocked on the door and shouted. Ross unlocked the front door with his copy of the house key. While Peckham stood on the porch, Ross went into the parlor and opened the guest bedroom door, where he found Ina and Lena Stillinger's bodies on the bed. Moore immediately told Peckham to call Henry Hank Horton, Villisca's primary peace officer, not to be confused with police officer, who arrived shortly thereafter. Horton's search of the house revealed that the entire Moore family and the 2 Stillinger girls had been bludgeoned to death. The murder weapon, an axe belonging to Josiah, was found in the guest room where the Stillinger sisters were found. Doctors concluded that the murders had taken place between midnight and 5 a.m. 2 spent cigarettes in the attic suggested that the killer or killers patiently waited. According to the official tour, there were no cigarettes found in the attic until the Moore family and the Stillinger guests were asleep. The killers began in the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping. Josiah received more blows from the axe than any other victim. His face had been cut to such an extent that his eyes were missing. The ceiling in his room also had a gouge mark from when the murderer lifted the axe to murder him. The killer or killers used the blade of the axe on Sarah, while using the blunt end on the rest of the victims. Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur, and Paul were next bludgeoned in the head in the same murder as their parents. Afterwards, the murderer returned to the master bedroom to inflict more blows on the elder Moores, knocking over a shoe that had filled with blood before moving downstairs to the guest bedroom and killing Ina and Lena. Seemingly afterwards, a 4-pound slab of bacon was taken out of the icebox and laid next to the axe. Investigators also found untouched food and bloody water during the search. After the search, people were let in to see if they could have committed the crime, completely contaminating the weapon. It was the 1912s, like is the 1900s. This was like before we had, obviously, all the technology that we have now, so nobody would have thought twice about contaminating the weapon because you can't really test it, But it's pretty evident that this was not handled the way it should have been. It kind of reminded me of John Bonet's crime scene when they had all those people in the house, and I was like, somebody doesn't know how to do their job, right? Investigators believed that all of the victims, except for Lena Stillinger, had been asleep when murdered. They thought that she was awake and tried to fight back as she was found lying crosswise on the bed and with a defensive wound on her arm. Lena's nightgown was pushed up to her waist and she was wearing no undergarments, leading to law enforcement speculation that the killer or killers sexually molested her or attempted to do so. This was later proven false. Over time, many possible suspects emerged, including Reverend George Kelly, Frank F. Jones, William Mansfield, Loving Mitchell, Paul Mueller, and Henry Lee Moore, no relation. Kelly was tried twice for the murder. The first trial ended in a hung jury, while the second ended in an acquittal. Other suspects in the investigation were also exonerated. Every transient and otherwise unaccounted for stranger was a suspect in the murders. Andrew Sawyer was one of those people. He was interrogated but not charged. He also was obsessed with the murders and slept fully clothed as if was ready to make a clean getaway, and he also slept with an axe by his bed. I don't know if that would immediately make him a suspect in my brain. To me that sounds like paranoia or schizophrenia, maybe paranoid schizophrenia. But I'm not an expert, and what do I know? I'm just an armchair detective. Isn't that what they call them? Couch detective, something like that. That's me. I'll accept that title with pride. Thank you very much. Right? Anyway. Reverend George Kelly was an English-born traveling minister in town on the night of the murders. Kelly was described as peculiar, reportedly having suffered a mental breakdown as an adolescent. And as an adult, he was accused of peeping and several times asking young women and girls to pose nude for him. On June 8, 1912, he came to Villisca to teach at the Children's Day services, which the Moore family attended on June 9, 1912. Hours before the bodies were discovered, Reverend Kelly had confessed to the murders in court, but the jury didn't believe his confession. Maybe they should have. Because, I don't know. It always interests me when I read about a case that is unsolved, because it's you had somebody who confessed and open court was like, yeah, I did it. And you were like, no, you didn't. Especially back then, you kind of had to rely on confession, which is obviously my opinion on why Jack the Ripper has never been caught, because you had to rely on confession because you didn't have the technology or whatever back in the day. Whatever. He left town between 5 a.m. and 5:50 a.m. on June 10th, 1912, hours before the bodies were discovered. Reverend Kelly had confessed to the murders in court, but the jury did not believe his confession. In the weeks that followed, he displayed a fascination with the case and wrote many letters to the police, investigators, and family of the deceased. This aroused suspicion, and a private investigator wrote back to Reverend Kelly asking for details that the minister might know about the murders. Kelly replied with great detail, claiming to have heard sounds and possibly witnessed the murders. His known mental illness made authorities question whether he knew the details because of having committed the murders or was imagining his account. In 1914, 2 years after the murders, Kelly was arrested for sending obscene material through the mail. He was sexually harassing a woman who applied for a job as his secretary. He was sent to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the National Mental Hospital in Washington, D.C. Investigators speculated again that Kelly could be the murderer of the Moore family. In 1917, Kelly was arrested for the Villisca murders. Police obtained a confession from him. However, it followed many hours of interrogation, and Kelly later recanted. After 2 separate trials, he was acquitted. Frank Fernando Jones was a Visalia resident and Iowa State Senator. Josiah Moore had worked for Frank Jones at his implement store for many years before leaving to own his own store. Moore reportedly took business away from Jones, including a very successful John Deere dealership. Moore was rumored to have had a sexual affair with Jones's daughter-in-law, though no evidence supports this. Another theory was that Senator Jones hired William Blackie Mansfield to murder the Moore family. 9 months before the murders at Visalia, a similar case of axe murder occurred in Colorado Springs, Colorado. 2 axe murder cases followed in Ellsworth, Kansas, and Paola, Kansas. The cases were similar enough to raise the possibility of having been committed by the same person. Other murders reported as being possibly linked to these crimes included the numerous unsolved axe murders along the Southern Pacific Railroad from 1911 to 1912, the unsolved Axemen of New Orleans killings, as well as several other such murders during this time. The murders in Colorado Springs were closely related in execution to those in the Moore house. H.C. Wayne, his wife and child, and Mrs. A.J. Burnham were found dead, murdered with an axe. Bed sheets were used to cover the windows to prevent passerby from looking in, and at the Moore house, the murderer hung aprons and skirts to cover the windows. As the murderers in Visalia, the murderer in Colorado Springs wiped the blood off his axe and covered the heads of the victims with bedclothes. Mansfield was also the prime suspect of the Burns Detective Agency of Kansas City, and Detective James Newton Wilkerson, who suggested that he was a cocaine-addicted serial killer. According to contemporary news reports, Wilkerson believed Mansfield was responsible for the axe murders of his wife, infant child, father-in-law, and mother-in-law in Blue Island, Illinois, on July 5th, 1914, 2 years after the Visalia murders. The axe murders committed in Paola, Kansas, 4 days before the Visalia murders, and the murders of Jenny Peterson and Jenny Miller in Aurora, Illinois. I mean, it's definitely possible, for sure. According to Wilkerson's investigation, all of the murders were committed in precisely the same manner, indicating that the same man probably committed them. Wilkerson stated that he could prove that Mansfield was present in each of the different crime scenes on the night of the murders. And each murder, the victims were hacked to death with an axe, and the mirrors in the homes were covered. All right, give me a second, because I gotta do this. Okay, sorry about that. Wilkerson's in each murder, the victims were hacked to death with an axe, and the mirrors in the homes were covered. A burning lamp with the chimney off was left at the foot of the bed, and a basin in which the murderer washed was found in the kitchen. In each case, the murderer avoided leaving fingerprints by wearing gloves, which Wilkerson believed was strong evidence that the man was Mansfield, who knew his fingerprints were on file at the federal military prison at Leavenworth. Hold on, I have to fix this because it just got all messed up. Okay, fixed it. Wilkerson managed to convince a grand jury to open an investigation in 1916, and Mansfield was arrested and brought to Montgomery County from Kansas City. Payroll records, however, provided an alibi that placed Mansfield in Illinois at the time of the Villisca murders. He was released for a lack of evidence and later won a lawsuit he brought against Wilkerson and was awarded $2,225. Wilkerson believed the pressure from Jones resulted not only in Mansfield's release, but also in the subsequent arrest and trial of Reverend Kelly. I'm going to break here real quick, and I'm going to change clothes and whatnot, and I will be right back. To convince a grand jury to open an investigation in 1916, and Mansfield was arrested and brought to Montgomery County from Kansas City. Payroll records, however, provided an alibi that placed Mansfield in Illinois at the time of the Villisca murders. He was released for a lack of evidence and later won a lawsuit he brought against Wilkerson and was awarded $2,225. Wilkerson believed that the pressure from Jones resulted not only in Mansfield's release, but also in the subsequent arrest and trial of Reverend Kelly. However, R.H. Thorpe, a restaurant owner from Shenandoah, Iowa, identified Mansfield as the man he saw the morning after the Villisca murders, boarding a train at Clarindia. This man said that he walked from Villisca. If proven to be true, this testimony would disprove Mansfield's alibi. Furthermore, it was reported that a Mrs. Bina Tompkins of Marshalltown was on her way to testify that she heard 3 men in the woods plotting the murder of the Moore family a short time before the killings. Henry Lee Moore was a suspected serial killer who was not related to the slain Moore family, who was convicted of the murder of his mother and grandmother several months after the murders in Villisca, his weapon of choice being an axe. Before and after the murders in Villisca, the very similar axe murders on his mother and grandmother were committed, and all of the cases showed striking similarities, leading to strong suspicion that some or all of the crimes were committed by an axe-murdering serial killer, and just like Blackie Mansfield, the axe-murdering Henry Moore can also be considered a suspect in some of these slayings. Sorry, it got stuck. At the inquest, it was reported that Sam Moyer, Josiah's brother-in-law, often threatened to kill Josiah Moore. However, upon further investigation, Moyer's alibi cleared him of his crime. The killer selected families who lived near railroad tracks, which is why the killer was suspected to have traveled, hence their book's title, seemingly struck an ambush at about midnight while the victims were asleep, used the blunt side of an axe rather than the blade to strike the victims in the head and face, used an axe found at the victim's home, and left in plain sight after the murders, covered the victims with blankets to prevent blood spatter, covered windows from inside the house, and locked the doors before departure. Well, at least he was nice enough to lock the doors, right? I mean, at this point, I don't think anything worse could happen to these people. I guess maybe if you don't want the body stolen before they're discovered, but, the point is he locked the doors like he was doing them a favor. I'm hung up on this. In Mueller's suspected crimes, there was often but not always a sexual motive directed towards a pubescent girl, as with Lena's being partly disrobed. In a blurb on the dust jacket of the hardcover edition of The Man from the Train, professor and crime writer Harold Schechter writes that the Jameses offered the most probable solution yet for the Vasilia murders. Okay, so listen. So there's this Criminal Minds episode in which there's a transient, like, it happens down in, like, Mexico, and there's this, like, transient, what are they called? Like, orchard farmers. And, of course, most of the ones that are in, like, Texas and whatnot, they're illegal immigrants. And that was the purpose of this show. And this man would take this train from one city to the next following, like, his brother who was still employed. And he would murder people in, like, vicious manners, okay? And I think it was with an axe, but it was in Texas, not Iowa, obviously. And they were trying to find the guy, and it turns out that he was hopping trains. So when I researched this originally, I was like, this kind of reminds me of that Criminal Minds episode, and, like, now I want to know, because it's on my mind, like, if that's what that episode is based off, is the Vasilia axe murders, maybe? Who knows? Could be anything. And like, you always watch these shows like Law and Order SVU or Criminal Minds, and they'll be like, none of this is based on true events. And I'm just sitting there like, because that sounds like Casey Anthony. Oh, that's like John Bonet. Oh, look, we have the Cleveland torso killer. And so it's like they take real life events and then they, like, twist it so that, like, people can't get offended and be like, you shouldn't talk about people like that or whatever, like the victims like that, which I say all the time, you shouldn't talk about the victims in a negative manner. But I'm just saying, it always says this is not based on a true story, and most of the time it is based on a true story. So, like, I just wanted to put that out there because I feel like this Criminal Minds episode reminded me of this particular, situation here. But I mean, like, he murdered 8 people without anybody knowing. Like, how do you do that? How do people not hear, like, screaming or... Unless, because, I mean, like, you would think, okay, so let's say that he, like, successfully murders one person without them making any noise. You're going to tell me that he successfully murdered 7 more people without anybody waking up? Like, these, like, if it was the kids especially, you would think they would be crying or screaming or... But no, apparently nobody heard anything. The paranormal reality television series Ghost Adventures covered the story of the Vasilia axe murders in the episode Vasilia Axe Murder House. The house and murders were used as a setting and premise of the haunted house horror, The Axe Murders of Vasilia. The story was covered as part of the Bedtime Stories podcast in the episode titled The Man on the Train. The paranormal reality television series, love you too, Scariest Places on Earth covered the story of the Vasilia axe murders and hosted a paranormal investigation on the property. The case was profiled on the television series Most Terrifying Places in America. The murders were also described in an episode 16 of the podcast Lore by Aaron Mahanke, as well as being referred to on the Lore TV show. Sorry, gang, just a second here. The murders were described live in episode 168 of the podcast My Favorite Murder. Maybe we should talk to her. By Karen Kilgruff. Like, why would you... Okay, several questions. Why would you name your podcast that? Because that makes you sound like serial killer AF. And for 2, why do you have a favorite murder? That's not normal. I did see the episode for, like, Ghost Adventures, and I love Ghost Adventures. I think it's a great show, but it always makes me laugh because they'll be like, did you hear that? And I'm like, I did hear that, but I did not hear what you said it was. So now I'm questioning my own existence. Like, I'm deaf in one ear, and I know I'm deaf in one ear, but like, something is not right because I didn't hear that. So if you ever watch Ghost Adventures and you feel like you're going crazy because you don't hear what they're saying you're supposed to hear, don't feel that way, because I'm like that every time I watch it. I'm like, that's not what he said. You know? The murders and purported paranormal activity were described in episode 21 of the podcast, And That's Why We Drink. The Travel Channel's television show Destination Fear filmed at the location for the 8th episode of their 3rd season. The murders and an interview with caretaker John Hauser are featured in the first episode of the podcast Haunted Road with host Amy Bruni. It was also investigated by Bruni, Adam Berry, and Psychic Chip Coffey for the episode of Kindred Spirits, which is a TV series. The murders were described in episode 271, October 17th, 2021, on the podcast Morbid. Everybody's got true crime podcasts. I get it, but everybody does. Ryan Bergera and Shane Medej of BuzzFeed Unsolved Supernatural investigated the paranormal activity within the house in season 7, episode 2. The murders were described in episode 28, the Villisca murders, June 7th, 2021, of the Crimes of the Centuries podcast. The murders were described, the story was also covered in episode 3 of the podcast I Scream Social. Clever name there, huh? YouTuber Bailey Sarian featured the murders on an episode of her weekly series, Murder, Mystery, and Makeup. The murders were also covered in episode 12 of the Will Continue to Monitor podcast. YouTubers Sam and Colby published a paranormal investigation video of the murders. YouTubers Twin Paranormal also conducted an investigation and posted a video in the Villisca axe murder house in late July of 2023. The murders were described in the episode Who Committed the 1912 Villisca Axe Murders on August 3rd, 2017 episode of the Stuff You Know podcast. In October 2023, the murders were described on the podcast Softcore History episode titled The Villisca Axe Murders. And that is the sad and unfortunate story of the Villisca Axe Murders. I have so many questions about how this man managed to kill 8 people without anybody hearing anything. More power to you, I guess. I don't even know how you would do that. Like, especially with so many children involved. As always, please don't do anything I wouldn't do. Be cautiously kind to others and make good choices. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys next week. Thanks. Bye.